Welcome to Insights in Touch, the podcast where industry insight meets meaningful conversation. Hosted by Kristin, this series presented by iFraud Foundation explores the real issues facing the property and casualty insurance world. It's the pulse of an industry under pressure and the voices working to protect its future. Stay informed, stay connected, stay in touch. Now, here's your host, Kristin Thorne.
Today on the Insights in Touch podcast, I am honored to have US Congressman Nick Langworthy. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
I have been so wanting to talk to you about this bill that you are proposing, the Infrastructure Expansion Act, which essentially would bypass absolute liability in New York, which is wreaking havoc on our construction industry, on building centers and schools and affordable housing and all these things that we need. Take me through the bill, what it is, why it's important.
Well, this bill, and the reason that I introduced the Infrastructure Expansion Act, this addresses New York's decades-old scaffold law, and that introduces absolute liability on contractors, on builders, on property owners for any gravity-related accidents. Now, obviously, we want to protect workers, and New York has always protected workers. It's a very friendly labor state, but this is a boom for the trial lawyers. And the trial lawyers have prevented many instances of reforms to this in our state capital for generations, because they want those huge, plaintiff cases where they get massive, settlements and judgments from these sort of accidents. What it's done is created an expense level on insurance for these contractors in these projects on anything that involves scaffolding, that it's 14% of total. Now, industry standard is about 2%. And New York has this layered, it's essentially a tax because of the high cost of insurance to do business. It's taken a lot of people and a lot of contractors out of New York. The state of Illinois was the last state to get rid of this other standard. They got rid of it in 1995. Illinois is obviously a very friendly state to workers and unions, and they, take care of people just the same way. And their insurance costs on projects like this are in that industry standard of 2%. So New York, our state government being in the pockets of trial lawyers has led to this. And think of all of the projects that have federal dollars attached to them. And the MTA, obviously it's billions and billions of dollars that is spent in New York on projects. And we are wasting federal tax dollars on this. What the Infrastructure Expansion Act would do would put that, regular standard that every other state functions under as a criteria of a project with federal dollars attached to it, and force New York to the table, force New York to reform, and finally pierce this veil that is just nothing but a giveaway to the trial lawyers in this state and sadly in this country.
So essentially, no federal money would go to a project that has absolute liability. They would have to have comparative negligence, which is what every other state has.
Is what every other state does. New York saying that this is some special protection for workers is so bogus, because we would have to say that 49 states don't care about workers. We're just saying that it has to go to the comparative negligence, go through the trial process, and make sure that it's a legitimate accident. Because what we're seeing in New York is this is an organized crime effort. You see fraudulent accidents, people leaping off of these scaffolds to create an injury event so that they get standards. And this has actually become an issue with several illegal immigrant groups. And this is really something that time has come. We are talking about major long-term investment in infrastructure in New York with the New York Penn Station. This is billions of federal tax dollars that are being squandered because of this ridiculous standard that's in place. So what we're hoping to do is to get this bill attached to the surface transportation bill. That is a must-pass piece of legislation. This is the moment that we can get it done. And I feel like we have momentum because when I tell this story through our colleagues in Congress, they get it. I mean, anytime that you have something that is so slanted that it is setting the table for massive judgments against companies, those companies go out of business. They become uninsurable if there's a notice of claim. I've had all sorts of insurance companies, stakeholders, contractors all across the state I've talked to on this topic, and they said that it is essentially the death penalty to one of these companies and their ability to get insured if the notice of claim on one of these accidents takes place. They obviously want to take care of their workers, their employees. That would be there with comparative negligence, just like it is in every other state in America.
Bring me through when you first heard about, maybe you've known about the scaffold law. Did you know about it?
I've certainly known about it for years. My prior job was as state chairman of the New York Republican Party. I'm a longtime veteran in New York government politics. And this has been really a red herring for our state for many generations. And it's something that there have been moments where there was work towards reform in Albany. It's always been stifled at the 11th hour because of the strength of the grip that the trial lawyers have on Albany. Albany is a very corrupt environment, and they stop these reforms. This is common sense. So, many Republicans in Congress are always fighting for additional states' rights. I have spent my time here trying to find federal workarounds for bad policy in my state capital. And sadly, it's a necessity to try to do that, whether it be energy policy or the scaffold law, to try to do that, to try to save New York from themselves in many instances. And even, Democratic members of Congress from New York I've talked to, they want to support it, but they're afraid of the pressures. Whether it be from, unions that have been, propped up by the trial lawyers. But the trial lawyers spend a lot of money to keep this standard in place because it is a massive premium that we're paying on policies in the biggest, most important city in the world.
Bring me through, you've known about the law for a long time. When did you finally decide, I'm going to take this on, I'm going to come up with something, and I'm going to make this happen?
Well, I believe Congressman Brandon Williams tried with a different variation of this in the last Congress. It didn't really go anywhere. You have to have the proper vehicle to attach something this niche onto, because this is not a thing that affects projects in other states. This really only affects New York because of this asinine law. So in order to get people's attention, you have to get it attached to something like the Surface Transportation Act that is going to drive a lot of dollars to New York, to projects that are really important to the country, to the tri-state area, and using this moment and this opportunity to get this attached to that is, I thought, the best opportunity. So when Congressman Williams, I believe he lost re-election, and I took up the mantle and said, all right, we're going to go try to land this plane.
Can you bring us a little, because you know all the ins and outs of Washington, a little more through, not too many details, because I know how convoluted it is, but how this works. So you attached it to this other bill, and what are the next steps, and how
they have not marked up the Surface Transportation Act yet. They will be doing that very soon. We have been working very closely with Chairman Sam Graves and stakeholders within the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee to try to get this in the base text. If for some reason they're not able to get it in the base text, I will use my position on the Rules Committee to have an amendment made to that bill to attach this legislation. I mean, this is the moment that we can get this done, and I think we're building real momentum here. This is the ultimate in fraud, waste, and abuse. The scaffold law is rife with fraud. It is not there to serve any purpose other than to line the pockets of a select few, and they're using fraudulent means to do it. we're wasting federal tax dollars at a time where our country is at $40 trillion in debt. So we want to see this waste eliminated. It will help build more housing in New York. Even Mayor Mondami says we have a housing crisis. This bill costs housing units, and we can actually measure it and say, if you only had to spend 2% of a total project on insurance instead of 14, how many more units could you build, or how much more affordably could you build a project? So this standard needs to go away. We need to use a national standard on this liability so that we can just function like every other state in America.
Congressman Nick Langworthy, thank you so much for joining us. We are all going to be watching.
Thank you so very much, Kristin. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thanks.